Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. Today I'm joined with Jenn Drummond, who's a motivational keynote speaker, a world record holder, a fellow author, and a fellow podcast host. Jenn, thanks for joining me today.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this conversation. But before we get started, just introduce yourself in your own words. Who is Jenn today?
Yeah, you did a really good job, if I had to be honest. I am a speaker and a mother of seven, world record holder, recently an author, um, an adventurer, an experiencer of life. So there we go.
I love it. I love it. And we'll definitely talk about we keep mentioning world record holder, but we haven't mentioned what that's for, but we'll get into that. But I don't know what's more impressive, your what you hold a world record in, or just being a mother of seven?
Mother of seven. Okay. I'm just letting you know. If I had a choice to do another child or mountain, I'll take the mountain. Okay. I am in the teens and tweens years, and I had no idea, friends, no idea, but I'm getting a lesson in it daily.
I'm sure, and it's an ever evolving lesson for sure,
Yes.
without a doubt. So let's talk a little bit about the world record. So you are the and correct me if I'm wrong, the first woman to climb the second highest summits of each of the seven continents, correct?
I
Did I
am.
get that
Yes,
right? Okay.
sir.
All right. So just to you know, unpack that a little bit, um, what was the inspiration behind doing that, and um, why the second highest summits as opposed to the highest summits on each of the seven continents?
Yes. Okay. So this whole thing. I was in a car wreck in 2018 that should have taken my life and didn't. The fact that it didn't spun me into 2019 as this year of the bucket list. What do I want to do, see, experience, become, try, like all that stuff. And that year was coming to an end, I realized in 2020 I was turning 40. So I wanted to do something significant for my 40th birthday. I decided that I would climb a mountain. I thought, what a great way. It was on my list. Good thing to do to launch a decade. So I was training for a mountain named Ama de Blanc. It's in Nepal. My friends convinced me, like, oh, it's a great mountain. Every single time you go to a Paramount Pictures movie, you can say, like, I climbed that mountain because of the logo that they had.
Okay.
Like, oh, that makes sense. Like, I have kids, we go to movies. Like, okay, cool. So I'll climb that. Well, if we remember back to 2020, COVID enters the scene. And so I'm not climbing any country anywhere, right? And now I'm a homeschool teacher to seven beautiful children because schools are shut down. And one of my guys was struggling with his math homework one day. I'm like doing that parent pep talk. Listen, buddy, we do hard things. You've got this. That little guy looks up at me and he goes, Mom, if we do hard things, why are you climbing a mountain called I'm a Dumb Blonde instead of a real mountain like Mount Everest? I'm a dumb blonde. Ama de Blom, honey. Not I'm a dumb blonde, but thank you. Like cute. We'll look at Everest. So we looked at Everest and then he went to bed and I was still looking at Everest. And I thought, you know what? If this little guy thinks Everest is the hardest mountain in the whole world, I'm going to climb it. And I'm going to show him that whatever our Everest is, we're capable of climbing. So I call up a coach and a coach is like, yeah, I can get you ready. This will be good. He goes, buy this book about becoming an uphill athlete. So I buy the book about becoming an uphill athlete. And in the front of it, there's a story of a lady who got a Guinness World Record for doing something in the Alps. I just remember thinking to myself, I could have done that. And if I did that, I'd actually be a cool mom because guess what? Homeschooling Jen, not a cool version. No one's enjoying it. And yeah, so I must have been talking to my coach that day, and my coach is like, I'll think of a world record for you. Don't you worry. I'm like, okay, listen, but I'm not growing pumpkins or speed eating hot dogs or doing like the weird things that are in that record book. He's like, no, I'll find you something good. So he ended up calling me a couple weeks later and he goes, Jen, I have the perfect world record for you. I'm like, okay. He's like, I think you should be the first female to climb the 7-second summits. I'm like, that sounds like a tongue twister. I don't even know what you're talking about. And so he goes, let me explain. He goes, the 7-second summits are the second highest point on each of the 7 continents. They're actually harder than the first 7. It's a feat that's only been done by one male. So you would be the first woman in the world to do this. He goes, if you think about it, there's 7 continents, there's 7 mountains, and you have 7 children. I think it sounds like a jackpot. And I thought to myself, it does kind of sound like a jackpot.
Yeah, seven
And
seven seven.
777. And I go, I've never slept in a tent before, but do you think that's a problem? He's like, oh, no, no, no. We'll work through those details. Don't worry about it. I'm like, okay, let's try it. So here we are.
So that you kind of answered my next question, which was, were you a climber um, before this?
I wasn't. I had climbed a mountain in the Grand Teton. I climbed the Grand Teton in Jackson Hole. I loved the experience. It was nature, it was quiet, you had achievement, you had like all the things. And I had told myself, like, hey, when I get more time, I'm going to climb some more mountains because this is a pretty fun experience. And that's why it got on the bucket list. And then it just was like that right timing and the evolution and all of it kind of came out to where it is now. I'm a world record holder for doing that pursuit, which in the beginning, I didn't know. I'm like, we'll see what happens. If I fail, no one's done it. So let's try it. What's there to lose?
What time frame elapsed from um, the first summit to number 7?
Yeah. So, in the beginning, I wasn't able to go anywhere to climb because COVID had shut down all the countries. So actually Chile in South America opened and Ojos del Salado is the second highest point there. So I climbed that mountain in December of 2020. I just finished with Mount Logan June 1st of 2023. So it took me about 2.5 years. Mount Logan and K2 were 2 mountains that I actually had to do twice because I didn't summit them the first time.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what, you know, the determination to not summit those 2 the first time and not just call it quits. Like what was it? And I guess how close were you to summiting them those first times? Then you were like, I got to go back. I got to finish this.
Yeah. So both times I was 2 days away from the summit. Like you're sitting there for weeks, right? So it was horrible. But listen, like the mountain always wins. So when it's Mother Nature versus your willpower, like Mother Nature wins, the mountain will always be there. It wasn't safe to continue. Um, and when I climbed K2, actually in 2021, I actually chose to go down on that one. I had a teammate that got caught in an avalanche and
Mm,
didn't make it.
mm,
And so
wow.
I had a choice to either go up with another team or come down and take care of my team. I'm like, that's a choice? Are you kidding me? Like
Right.
my teammate just died. That's not a choice. I'm going down to take care of my team, but thank you. Um, so for me, this whole pursuit has been about the experience and just meeting people and having a common goal and building these teams together to make it happen. And we don't always hit our goals the first time. And so I know my kids are watching and I didn't hit K2 the first time, but I turned around for a good reason. And when I came back to it, I had a good reason. And I feel like they need more examples of people failing and coming back and trying again and doing it as many times as it takes to get to the top. Because I truly feel like life is lived in the pursuit. We're at the destinations of these things for the least amount of time. And once we
Right.
get to that destination, we're already hungry for the next thing. Our
Yeah.
brain wants the pursuit. So just understanding that that was part of it.
Yeah. I mean, how tough was that to lose a teammate like that and then to go back and do it again, with the full understanding that, that could have been you, or on this, next attempted summit, you could be that teammate as well. I mean, this isn't like, this isn't a walk in the park that we're talking about. We're talking about summiting mountains. I mean, there's a lot of inherent danger involved in that. So, I mean, to psych yourself up after going through that and to lose someone that was on your team during that first attempt. I mean, how tough was that to overcome that?
Oh, it's horrible. I mean, absolutely horrible. When I came down, we buried a human. Like I still get goosebumps thinking about it because you read about that stuff. You don't expect to have it be a part of your story or that close to you. I flew back to the United States. Actually, my kids went to camp when I climbed K2, so I beat them home. And I remember taking time to just process the whole story. Like I wrote it out on paper and like talked to a therapist and just kind of went through it because if my kids came home and I had that victim mentality, they would sniff it out. And then that fear or that lack of power would cause them to have fear of me continuing on this pursuit. So I knew I needed to get through this and understand and write a story that gave me a chance to own the situation and come back with vengeance. So the reality was the individual that passed was a 68-year-old that was married to the mountains. Like he had won awards in mountaineering, had been doing all different kinds of things, and he was setting a new route on K2. Um, no family, no kids, no nothing. And for me, I was like, you know what? If I'm 68 and I love mountain climbing and I'm like that age, like if I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down doing something I love versus other options. And so for me, it was kind of like, hey, we don't get to choose when we die,
Right.
but we sure get to choose how we live. And this person was living. And so that was kind of how I metabolized that event. And then I looked at all the other things that went wrong and I realized, okay, when I go back, I'm picking a different team that has different safety protocol. I'm picking like different things that I've learned from this first time to be just better prepared for the second time. The crazy thing is the second time I go to K2, so this is summer of 2022. I'm not excited to go because now I know what I'm walking into. But I did get a phone call a few weeks before it was time for me to leave. And this phone call informed me of an individual that had been training that didn't have the resources to climb their country's peak. And so I'm like, oh, you know what? I have resource, like we have gear up the wazoo here. I'll bring some stuff over, happy to assist. I go back to K2. It like some ways it was easier on the way in, and then some ways it was harder. So I'm like, okay, this is a different experience. Obviously, things are going differently. So everything's new and approach it with that mentality. But the crazy thing is I go into K2 in 2022 and I get Giardia on the way in, which if you guys are listening, that pretty much means that there was like animal feces in the water that they didn't
Mm,
get sterilized out. And so then you get diarrhea.
mm,
Blech, right? Like so gross. I go on an antibiotic. It was way too strong of an antibiotic for my weight and whatever else. So it wiped out all the good and bad bacteria. I was sneezed on by a donkey. I know, bizarre. Like, what are we talking about? But here's the thing, like you have animals carrying your stuff into base camp because it lightens the load for humans. So donkeys carry our gear in. And I'm a person who cares about animals. So I'm checking on these animals every day to make sure they have food and water and whatever else and not carrying too much weight. And I don't know, I just care. And I remember that donkey sneezing on me. And I'm like, buddy, I'm the only person who cares about you. And you're going to sneeze on me? Like, this is not cool. Well, a couple days after that sneeze, which we didn't correlate until after this fact, I get sick again. And they're like, oh, you got Giardia again. I'm like, come on, people, like boil the water. Okay. So then I go on the antibiotic again. It kind of makes me healthy for a couple days. And then I'm presenting the same symptoms. This goes on like 3 times. And now all of a sudden it's time to climb this mountain. And my guide is like, Jen, I don't think you're healthy enough to climb. I'm like, I don't think you understand how much this country doesn't like me. I am not coming back to this place. So we need to get me to the top of that mountain. And he's like, all right, well, you're welcome to come. But when you start feeling like too sick or weak, then you just need to own it. I'm like, fair enough. So I honestly think like being sick, climbing that mountain, like just didn't give my brain enough bandwidth to metabolize like the dangers and all the things that were going on because I was like, just keep climbing. Don't go to the bathroom in your pants and just keep climbing. Right. So I climb, we have success. I become the third American female to stand on top of K2. Woo-hoo. The bigger win is 30 minutes later, the first Pakistani female stands on top of her country's prized peak because I was able to help. And so
That's cool.
sometimes I think we have these failures or these setbacks in our lives and we're like, oh, done. But maybe, just maybe, if you're listening, you can entertain the idea that the universe is using you for more. Like something didn't go the way that you wanted it to, because something better is in store that you get to be a part of. And for me, that was my K2 journey. How awesome is it that I got to participate in this woman's story, said history, and how cool is it now that like girls that are my daughter's age, 11 years old, can see photos of somebody that looks like them in this environment. Well, I get down from the mountain and I check my satellite phone. I'm all excited. I'm gonna call my family, like, I somebody, blah, 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 blah. Well, I have a voicemail on my phone. And it says, Jen, hey, your kids don't like camp. So they're gonna check themselves out and we're gonna put them with a camp counselor until you can come pick them up. Like, I didn't even pay attention that this was an option. So I called this camp and I said, I'm sorry, their mom just climbed K2, AKA me. They can handle Yosemite National Park for a little bit longer. Like, there's no need for them to check themselves out of camp. And she's like, they're at the ages where if they don't want to be here, we don't force them to be here, because we're not just taking care of your kids, we're taking care of other kids and they affect the entire community. Okay, fine. I'm on my way. So I do like the fastest exit of K2. It's a 55-mile trek out of base camp. I'm still not feeling awesome. So I get out, I fly home, I pick up those little buggers. We have lots of conversations and I go to the hospital because I'm still not feeling good. So I talked to my doctor there and he's like, okay, you're in a third world country and we're running these tests. And he's like, running through his checklist. Were you by farm animals? Like, no, I wasn't by farm animals. I was climbing a mountain. And he's like, and I'm like, wait, I was by farm animals. And in fact, one of those dudes sneezed on me. And the doctor's like, we need to run a different test. I'm like, okay, perfect. So he runs a different test and he comes back and he goes, you have anthrax. I'm like, what?
Wow.
He goes, yeah, third world countries, farm animals can carry anthrax. And typically humans won't get it because their immune system's able to beat it out, right? It doesn't come at you strong enough. But because you were already immunocompromised, you didn't have the ability to fight it off. It got in your system. They were giving you antibiotics, but not for a long enough period. So it would keep growing back. And so I had to go on IV antibiotics. And he goes, listen, I want to tell you something, Jen. You have a 40% chance of living right now. This is serious stuff.
Wow.
Had you been in that country for another day or two, you wouldn't be here today. And
Wow.
again, like, what would be the only thing that would get me home from K2 early, like then instead of the 1 week trek out, is something wrong with one of my monkeys.
Right.
And right. And so he's like, be grateful that your kids were turds and didn't like their camp because it's what got you home and saved your life. And I just think it's so bizarre how much life is really working for us
Yeah.
in the background every single day of our lives.
Yeah. Yeah. What do they say? A lot of times when you view something as a setback, it's actually a setup for something better, you know?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that, and it's tough to recognize it in the moment. I think in retrospect is when we look back and recognize that. But you know, the quicker we can get that ability to understand that, okay, this happened. Now what's going to happen? It's going to be better. I
Yeah.
think that's the way we need to start approaching things for sure. Um, so when you did that summit of K2, where was that chronologically in the seven?
Yeah. So attempt one was number 3. I actually did Ojos del Salado in South America. I did Mount Kenya for Africa. Then I went to Everest because I used Everest for training ground for K2 because K2 is so much more dangerous. And then after that K2 failure, I went to Russia, climbed in Russia, got that. Went to Antarctica, climbed in Antarctica, got that. Then I went to Mount Logan, failed Mount Logan, went to Canada or went to Pakistan, summited K2, and then went to Australia, summited, and then went back to Canada and summited.
Yeah.
So it was kind of in the middle. And that was once K2 was done, right? Because you hear about K2 and all this stuff. I was like, this might actually happen. Like, I might actually do this thing. Like, work, like, this is crazy. Like, who would have thought? But, and it was kind of funny because the beginning of the pursuit, it was just so overwhelming and felt so far away. And then halfway through, you're like, oh, wow. And then as it was getting towards the end, like everything you were savoring, you're like, I'm never going to get this pursuit again. Or I'm never going to be in this part of the world again. I'm never going to have this experience again. So whether it was good or bad, it was like cared less because you just wanted to live it as much as you could.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you did summit the last one, number 7, I mean, like what was that feeling like when you finally did it
Yeah.
after, so it was what, year and a half, 2 years total time
Two and a
span
half
there?
years.
Two and a
Yeah.
half
Like I
years.
remember like you're watching yourself like walk the plank almost, right? Like you're on this ridge line and like, I'm gonna have 10 more steps and this thing's gonna be done. And to be honest with you, you take in this breath at the top, you bring it into your body, and like everything disappears. There's no sun, there's no mountain, there's no me, there's no air, there's not like you're just this moment of awe. And then you start to exhale, and then things start to separate again, and time exists, and feelings exist, and whatever. And you say to yourself, like, man, life is pretty freaking magical when we let it be. And then it's almost like I took my soul out of my body and threw it out into the universe and said to myself, I can't wait to find you again. I don't know where, I don't know how, I don't know doing whatever, but I'm excited to see what shows up that I get to connect to that magical force.
Love that. I love that. So we'll shift a little bit here. You just released a book
Yeah.
called Breakproof. Um, Tell me a little bit about, what inspired you to then write, and um, you know, from the summits, um, how are you using those experiences to, to help others through that story in the book?
Yeah. So I built a business that I hired myself out of prior to having children. I had kids, got in the car wreck, got into climbing mountains. And it was interesting because as I was climbing mountains, I was like, oh, this is the same thing you experience when you're building a business or when you set a goal or you do whatever. It's just I'm physically feeling it on this climb. I met with a friend for lunch like halfway through the pursuits, and he's like, your stories are fascinating. You need to write a book and like share these stories to help other people on their pursuit. I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, I can see how they correlate. Like, sounds good. So I started writing, and what I do is I take the reader to each mountain, share a specific experience that I had on that particular mountain, and then extract a lesson that no matter where you are or what you're doing, you're like, oh, okay, this is normal, or this is going to maybe happen, or here's when it does happen, how I prepare and predict and perform. Um, so the book just was released recently and it's so fun, right? Like it's so fun to climb your own mountain, but then when you see other people having that aha moment and able to go farther on their pursuit, it gives all the struggle meaning
Yeah.
and makes it totally worth it.
Yeah. So were you a writer previous to publishing the book? Did you do a lot of writing
No,
So
again,
you never climbed a mountain, you never wrote a book, and now here we are talking about both of them.
yeah, yeah. Like, and that's the thing. I think that's what the car wreck gave me permission to do. Like, who cares if you're not a mountaineer or an author or whatever? You're just not one because you haven't done it yet. Like, go
Right.
ahead and do it. And if it gets you excited, continue to do it. If it doesn't get you excited, check it off the list and go to the next thing. Um, so it just gave me the permission to experience and explore and allow and let it be what it is and be okay if it didn't work out and it wasn't what I thought. Like, now I know.
I love that. I love that. And I know, you also host a podcast as well. We mentioned that briefly in the introduction. It's the Seek Your Summit podcast. And what I love about that is you say in there that you're focused on inspiring others to go beyond success to a life of significance. And, explain that to me a little bit as to what that means, going beyond success to a life of significance.
Yeah. Like a lot of people that I've interviewed or I've talked with, they get to this top of the mountain and they look back and are like, this was it. Like, this is like what I dedicated everything to. Like, this is my summit. And for them to like turn that into significance where they share it with others, they mentor others, they make the path clearer or easier for others to follow. That's where like the true success comes from.
Yeah.
It isn't because I got to the top of the mountain. It's because I had that experience, which now opens up more experiences for you. And really understanding that our success only has significance when we're able to share it and multiply it and utilize it to help mankind.
Yeah. I love that. Um, for my listeners, they all know that I'm a baseball guy. I'd coached for 30 years, and one of my favorite quotes is the quote by Jackie Robinson that says, a life isn't significant except for its impact on others. And that is so true. No matter what you do, no matter how quote unquote successful you are, um, the only significance to that is how you interact with others, how you share that with others, and again, help them find, what their success is. So I find it amazing that you know, been able to kind of parlay that, um, from what you've done on the mountains to now what you're doing with your podcast and your speaking engagements and that sort of thing. Was there anything, as you were growing up, um, that kind of drove that home that, you know, it's more about the significance than it is about the success, or is it something you learned later in life?
Like, so interesting story. My dad's mom had 11 children and her husband died when he was 40. My dad's the oldest. He was 18 when that happened. And from a financial perspective, my grandma had no success. From a loving, empowering, encouraging, a like that, probably one of the most successful people I know.
Yeah.
Right. And it was so like you wanted to have success because you wanted to pay back what she provided. And she was love, she was courage, she was strength, she was all these things. And I remember standing on the top of Mount Tyree. So Mount Tyree's in Antarctica. I'm the first American female, second female ever. We were like the 15th through 20th people to climb this mountain. And when I was up there, I'm like, how it's crazy. Because had I been born when my mom was born or my grandma was born, like this thing wouldn't even have been in the realm of possibility,
Right.
right? They didn't know. But by them doing them in their little teeny tiny corner of the world, that ripple effect generations later has created so much for all of us that it's just so inspiring because like each one of us in our own little corner of this globe are doing big things. We might just not see the fruit of our labor.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, sometimes just us planting those seeds is what becomes important. Um, And it's tough at times to plant those seeds, not necessarily knowing whether or not you will see them bloom. It's like you have to plant it and move on and have that faith that it will bloom. I know for me, one of the things that's so wonderful about what my wife and I are doing now by living in a RV full time, traveling throughout the country, is the fact that I have now been able to see a lot of the fruit of my labor during my coaching days because I can connect with a lot of my older players who are now scattered throughout the country, and they're now adults and you know parents themselves and coaches in a lot of other areas and just involved in their communities, and being able to see um, you know those fruits blossom has been an incredible blessing for me, because it again, you don't always get to see it. A lot of
Yeah.
times you plant the seed, you move on and you hope. So to be able to see that for me has been an incredible blessing. So
Oh yeah. It's like the best gift ever.
yeah, so even now with with what you're doing, um, you're planting seeds for others to benefit. Um, you talked about, things that, your parents and grandparents did generations ago, and now, here you are opening up doors. You were, part of the woman from Pakistan's journey, when she became the first woman to summit. And, you know, do you like what feelings, what emotions come over you when you um, really kind of take a step back and think about the seeds that you're planting and what doors they may open in the future for those coming behind you?
Yeah. I think I'm just so humbled, right? Like that I am willing to put one foot in front of the other and trust that there's a greater energy source, whatever, above me that is using me to do good in the world. And the stories that I get to partake in or participate in, I could have never came up with myself, right? Like it's so awesome how interconnected we all are and how the littlest things can make the biggest difference. And I'm grateful because that means every one of us contribute.
Yeah. Yeah, and we definitely do. We
Yeah.
definitely do. Um, and I don't think that, you know, many people, I don't think, grasp that. And I think the earlier in life that
Mhm.
you grasp it, the better off you are. Um, so now that you have, summited those seven, what does the future hold for you? What mountains are in your future? And are they literal mountains still, or are they more some figurative mountains?
Yeah. Well, first off, when I summited on June 1, I think one of the biggest questions right afterwards is like, what's next? What's next? What's next? And I told everybody, I'm like, I'm taking a sabbatical. I'm taking a year off. I'm not committing to something else right now because I need to demonstrate a season of rest for my kids and not have them feel like everything is always on. We're always performing. We're always doing. So this year has been very intentionally slowed down and just more reflective and connecting. I do have the book coming out, the book's out. So that's been a big project. Probably what I'm most excited about when this podcast releases, I will be in Africa climbing Kilimanjaro with a handful of people and three of my children.
Wow.
So my three oldest boys were interested in going. Some other people had asked me if I would put together an expedition. I love expeditions because it's just a way to embody all these things we talk about in the framework of leadership, teamwork, mindset, physical, all those pieces. So I'm super excited about those opportunities and continue to do those types of pursuits.
Yeah, I love that. A friend of mine, actually, for her 40th birthday, um, went and did Kilimanjaro back in, I
Awesome.
believe, 2021. And I did a podcast with her probably about 2 years ago, shortly after she did that. And yeah, she just talked about how, amazing it was. And, I like hiking. I can't say I'm a mountain climber. I love hiking. I but I don't know that I'll ever actually climb a mountain. I know you should never
All it
say
is
never,
hiking a
but
whole bunch of days in a row. I mean, that's Kilimanjaro. So it's
yeah,
just stringing a whole bunch of hikes one after another, and then you're finally at the top.
yeah.
So,
I did hike Picacho Peak in Arizona, which was the first time I ever had to actually use cables because
yeah.
the angle was so steep. And that was pretty wild for sure. But certainly nothing like Kilimanjaro or Everest or anything along those lines. But um, yeah, so it's pretty cool, um, that that's on the radar for you, and that you're going to be able to experience it with three of your kids. So what you know, what are some of the emotions now, leading up to that, and how do you guys train for that? Like, how do you train for Kilimanjaro?
We're lucky. We live in Park City, Utah, so we can get out on the mountain and hike up quite a bit. But honestly, stairs, 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 stairs. And if you don't have stairs, you do a step up at your fireplace ledge or you on a chair in the kitchen. You just go up and down on that thing a whole bunch of times, or a park bench. Just getting that vertical motion in play is what you're doing on the mountain. So
Right.
whatever makes that easy for you is what's going to make it easier for you on the mountain.
Yeah, I love it. Jen, is there anything that we missed that you think would be beneficial to the listeners throughout our conversation here?
Well, I do have a gift for your listeners if they're interested. If we type the word Everest to the number 33777, so that's Everest 777, I share with you a video of the Milky Way going over Everest Base Camp. And I keep this in my favorites, my photo album on my phone. Anytime like life's getting overwhelming or hard or whatever the story is, I watch that and I reconnect to the magic of life and get out of my own way and like breathe again. So I find like just little things like that that cue us into our insignificant yet significant story helps us continue.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll tell you what, we when we were in Medora, North Dakota in 2021, we were at Theodore Roosevelt National Park, the South Unit. We went out there in the evening to basically a stargazing festival that they were having, so to speak. And we got out of the RV. It was the first time in my life where I, looked up and saw the Milky Way literally from horizon to horizon, and it was incredibly awe-inspiring. I mean, nothing like I've, had ever experienced. And this summer we're going to go to Alaska, and our fingers are crossed that we're going to get to see the Northern Lights. So it's that's a cool gift to give to the listeners for sure. So I hope they type that in. Um,
Please.
so Jen, if anybody out there wants to connect with you, wants to copy the book, wants to book you for a speaking engagement, anything like that, how do they find you on the internet?
Yes, I think the best way is my website. So jenndrummond.com, and that's two N's in Jen and two M's in Drummond. You'll be able to order the book, see some of the challenges. You'll be able to get dispatch notes. So I'm on expedition. I give you daily updates of what's going on wherever I am, which people love to follow along on. Hire me for speaking, figure out what social channels I'm on. So if you have a platform of choice, you can reach out and say hello. Would love to connect with everybody here. It's so fun to hear what mountains you're climbing in your world.
Love it. I love it. Jen, so that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, and that comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. What's one of the little things that Jen does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place?
Um, I make sure every day I do something nice for somebody that I don't know. Whether that's holding open a door at the grocery store
Mm,
or like returning a cart to like the grocery line so that the person doesn't have to like chase them all over the parking lot, or I'll put a little note in one of my kids' lunches, or I'll write a note to a friend that I haven't and send it out in the mail. Like just one thing. Right? If you just do one kind thing a day that has zero way of being repaid back that exact way, life starts to become magical.
I love that. I love that. Jen, this is a great conversation. I really appreciate you taking the time. I look forward to following along and seeing what you got going on in the future, and seeing what else you have to summit down the road. And for those out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of one of my books. And again, Jen, thank you so much for taking the time to join me today.
Thank you.
You bet.